Chris, I don't think enough can be said about what transpired today and how this pilot of this US Airways flight handled this situation. He is going to be hailed as a hero. And all these passengers, as we have heard them say from these interviews with Marcia Kramer, that everyone on this crew handled it perfectly. Let's check back in with Lou Young. He's standing by with some more information for us. Lou, what do you have?
Well, you know, when we first saw the wreck this afternoon, we thought it was a movie set. The plane floating in the water on one of the monitors, and the rescue going on, and it appeared too perfect. And then a moment later, we realized it was exactly what it appeared to be. That it was, in fact, a plane crash. A U.S. Air jet that had gone down, crashed in the Hudson River, a hard emergency water landing, and there it was floating in the river, and people being taken off by emergency boat. We rushed down to the scene here, got out up by the impact site, up by 48th Street, and followed it on foot past 30th Street, and it continued to drift south past 30th Street down toward the harbor. Suddenly, eventually, only the tail sticking up over the water as the flotilla of rescue boats surrounded it and escorted it down with the tide. We passed one man, Jeff Kajalski of Norwalk, Connecticut, who said that he, moments before, had been on his way to a golf outing in Myrtle Beach, and then suddenly found himself with a window seat to disaster. Listen to what he had to say.
About 3 or 4 minutes into the flight, I was sitting in 22A, so the left engine just blew. Fire, flames coming out of it, and I was looking right at it because I was sitting right there. And it just started smelling a lot like gasoline. And a couple minutes after that, the pilot said, "You guys got to brace for a hard impact." And that's when everyone started, to be honest, saying prayers. And
you're going to get hung up. To give you an idea where we are right now, we're on West Street, and the impact zone, 48th Street, is all the way down there where those lights are flashing. That's where Marcia Kramer is at the triage area. The wreck floated on the Hudson River past the point where we are at West 30th Street, and then beyond, way down there, you see a few of the emergency vehicles still lingering at the site down there where the wreck currently is continuing to sink in the Hudson River. Some buses being allowed now on West Street, and some emergency traffic still moving, but essentially the West Side Highway remains closed. What an amazing afternoon. A plane crash in the Hudson River, and everybody gets off alive. We're live on the West Side. Lou Young, CBS 2 News.
All right, Lou, thanks so much. We'll check back in with you in a couple of minutes as we continue to get unconfirmed reports, the number of injured and the number of passengers that were actually on the plane. We'll continue to give you that information as it comes in. We're still waiting for official numbers in both cases. One thing we can tell you is that from their corporate headquarters in Tempe, Arizona, US Airways will hold a press conference in the coming moments. We'll bring that press conference to you live here on CBS 2 as we continue to monitor these live pictures of the Hudson River here at 5:03 on this Thursday afternoon. No one expected this, that's for sure. Weather was our big story of the day. We heard all of a sudden that there was this plane down in the Hudson River. You looked at the initial pictures, almost too surreal to believe that it was actually happening. But now, as we come to find out, this was in fact a plane crash here on the Hudson River. And right now, we've averted catastrophe as we continue to wait for injuries.
Well, like Lou said, everyone thought that this could have been a movie, a scene out of a movie, and it turns out that this was a very real situation, and all of the necessary people and crews that were supposed to responded exactly the way they should have. Let's go right now to Cindy Hsu with the very latest information that she has. Cindy.
All right, well, Christine, we are at Roosevelt Hospital right now. We're in front of the emergency room. We've seen a lot of ambulances come in, but at this point, they only have 3 patients, and doctors tell us that they're being treated for exposure. At this point, they don't know how serious, but at this point, it's just exposure. We're trying to get one of the doctors over here, but he's tied up trying to get updates on the patients. There are several hospitals the patients are going to. They're going to St. Vincent, St. Luke's, and also one in Weehawken, New Jersey. Originally, doctors here had heard that they were expecting about 25 to 50 patients, but again, you know, a lot of times when this happens, they'll get some high numbers at first and then sometimes end up with maybe 10 patients. But at this point, 3 patients at Roosevelt Hospital, and they're just being treated for exposure. We'll keep updating you. I'm live here at Roosevelt Hospital. Back to you.
All right, Cindy, thanks so much. We'll check back in with you as well. Obviously, with an accident of this magnitude, the emergency response basically second to none here in New York City. They do it better than anybody. Let's go to Hazel Sanchez right now, who's on the west side for more information. Hazel?
Yeah, really, the response has been absolutely incredible, Chris. Just to give you an idea of where we are right now, we're on the corner of West 40th Street and 12th Avenue, right across the street from the ferry terminal, which has become the Triage Center, where they are treating most of the victims from this plane crash. We are being told by some police officials that there are about 146 people that were on board that plane at the time of the crash. Many of them are being treated here at this Triage Center, but we're told there are also some victims that are being treated across the Hudson somewhere in New Jersey. All of these lights that you're seeing here right now, many of them fire department emergency vehicles, but also ambulances from nearby hospitals waiting to take any of the victims that are still inside the Triage Center, waiting to be transported to those nearby hospitals. We have not been allowed inside the Triage Center. We were inside there. Marsha Kramer was inside there earlier today speaking to some of the victims, talking about their experiences, but we have since been told that we're not allowed in. Red Cross has
sorry, we got to interrupt you right now, Hazel. We're going to go live right now to Tempe, Arizona. This is the headquarters of US Airways holding their press conference right now. Let's listen in.
To New York to be with those that were affected by this and to get there. So he won't have time for questions, but I can afterwards help give you some additional information or guide you to the right resources for that afterwards. So, Doug.
Thank you all for joining us so quickly. I can confirm US Airways Flight 1549 was involved in an accident. The Airbus A320 was en route to Charlotte from LaGuardia. It had 150 passengers on board. The flight was operated with a crew of 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants. US Airways is confirming passenger and crew names and will issue those as soon as possible. At this point, no additional details can be confirmed. Our preliminary report is that everyone is off the plane and accounted for. We've activated our US Airways care team of specially trained employee volunteers to assist those affected by this accident. Individuals who believe they may have family members on board Flight 1549 may call US Airways at 1-800-679-8215 within the United States. The number can be reached toll-free from international locations through AT&T's USA Direct. To contact an AT&T operator, please visit www.usa.att.com/traveler for USA Direct access codes. Others are asked please not to call this number so the lines can be kept available for those who truly need them. It's premature to speculate about the cause of this accident. Out of respect for those affected, we would ask that you also resist the temptation to speculate. The National Transportation Safety Board will conduct a thorough investigation to determine the probable cause with our complete support and the support of many others. Further, we are working with and will continue to cooperate fully with the NTSB, local, state, and national authorities, and answers will emerge during the course of that investigation. Right now, we're working to care for those who have been touched by this accident. Members of our airline family will come together with these families to help however we can. I'm on my way to New York shortly. In closing, safety is, has been, and forever will be our foremost priority at US Airways. All of us at US Airways are committed to determining the cause of this event and to assisting in every way possible in preventing a similar occurrence. US Airways will continue to release information as it becomes available. Please monitor usairways.com for the latest information. Thank you.
Okay, Steve, as we watch CEO Doug Parker head off to New York, we have some information.
Okay, you were listening to CEO of US Airways, Doug Parker, speak briefly. He is now en route to New York City to assess the situation firsthand. Also, the NTSB, also en route from Washington to New York. They should be on the ground here by about 6:30 local time to also assess the situation. But, Christine, one thing we are learning now, we can confirm 150 passengers, which is a full load for this Airbus 320 on board. And I guess the note we take away from this is the preliminary reports, everyone's safely off the plane. There are some injuries, different degrees of severity, which we will continue to report throughout the evening, but everyone, 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants off the plane safely, along with 150 passengers.
That's right. And they also did give out an 800 number for family members who may be worried about their relatives on this plane. And I wanted to give that 800 number out. This is for U.S. residents, 800-679-8215. Once again, 1-800-679-8215. Doug Parker, the CEO, also said that it is too premature to discuss a cause pause right now and for everyone to respect the investigation. However, witnesses, passengers on this airline all said they heard a boom, and that is when the plane started to have the engine troubles. We also have right now Senator Schumer on the phone with us. He was just briefed by the Transportation Secretary. Senator, what did you hear?
Well, what we heard first is that it seems they're certain everyone is off the plane. It seems everybody has been saved, praise God. That the pilot, that the cause seems to be, and all this is preliminary, obviously, is that a large flock of geese put both engines out. Not just one engine, but both. And that the pilot, from the preliminary indications, deserves the Congressional Medal of Honor. He turned the plane to the Hudson River, turned it in the right direction, make sure it didn't go nose into the water, but had a flat landing, and did an amazing and miraculous job.
Senator, sorry, Chris, have you been able to see these pictures and how this whole scene has transpired, and your thoughts on the rescue efforts here? I know that you mentioned the heroic efforts of the pilot, but just how New York Rescue and Fire and the Waterways and the Coast Guard, how they all descended on this scene and did exactly what they needed to do.
It was a little like a mini version of 9/11, where whether you're a public or private employee, everyone just came together and did their best. I saw New York Waterways Ferry, I saw NYPD stuff, I saw everything on the television, but Secretary Peters was reporting to me on the aviation end of it.
Senator Schumer, I know you've had a busy day in Washington. When you heard what had happened, when you first saw pictures, what I'm sure someone had told you there's a plane down in the Hudson. You think it's a Piper or a Cessna, but then to actually see these pictures, what was the first thing that entered your mind?
I heard it was a US Air plane, and the first thing I heard it at about 3:45, and I figured, oh my God, it's the shuttle. I'll bet I know people on that plane. Oh my God, who would be on? My daughters all there up in college immediately. Am I okay? Am I okay? No, when it's a US Air flight leaving LaGuardia, everyone probably had the same reaction. They think, oh my God, I probably know someone who's on that plane.
And now to hear that all 150 passengers are accounted for, it's got to be a tremendous relief.
I brought it up to a bunch of my colleagues. We were talking about the stimulus package, and I brought it up, and then a few minutes later I got the word of what was happening, and they were following it minute to minute, and now there's just a feeling of joy, happiness, and truly, praise God, this was just a modern miracle.
All right, Senator Chuck Schumer, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. We know you're busy down there, and but it's also good to get to your perspective on this, and we thank you for taking the time, Senator Charles Schumer, for us this afternoon.
All right, right now we want to bring in Pablo Guzman. He's going to talk more about these bird strikes, and I think maybe for the common person you think to yourself, this can't be all that normal. This can't happen very often, but apparently it does.
Yeah, so much so that Airbus, that US Airways jet is an Airbus A320. Airbus actually puts out a series of flight operations briefing manuals, kind of like online references for pilots, and there's a whole separate subcategory called bird strikes. Now, among some of the main points are that pilots may expect to encounter from 2 to 5 bird strikes during their career. The FAA reported over 33,000 bird strikes to civil aircraft between 1990 and 2000. North America has a 32% exposure to bird strikes. That's the second highest in the world behind Europe at 42%. 15 to 20% of bird strikes can damage the aircraft. In the early 1950s, this all became a hazard because of the development of jet engines. About 50% of bird strikes do damage the engine, and perhaps most important from those manuals, the risk of damage after a bird strike increases with engine thrust. We had a graphic at the bottom of the screen just a moment ago saying this happened about 3 minutes after takeoff, and apparently that's about the time frame that Airbus says can be the biggest risk factor when it comes to birds and planes. And, you know, in the past, I'm sure those of us who are not pilots, you know, you see those pictures every so often in the newspaper of trying to get the geese away from the airport, and we think it's funny. It's not. This is what it's about.
I think the thing that's, it is talking to Lonnie earlier, who was a pilot, as we continue to mention that, it's somewhat common for 1 bird, 2 birds, here and there, but to lose both engines, a flock of geese that severe, to lose both engines to a plane this size. I mean, these are not little engines; these are big engines. And the housing alone can withstand some of these birds.
Well, you heard the numbers that Pablo just talked about, and yet it doesn't. They didn't all result in the plane going down. This is something else.
Lonnie, I have a question for you. All indications show that these were numerous birds that were up in the air. Are pilots alerted of that fact before they take off? Can the tower tell you that there are birds in the area and they need to look out for them?
The tower will tell you, hey, we've got a flock of geese in the area, basically be on the lookout for something like that. But come on, Christine, I mean, birds are just, they're a creature of God. I mean, they come flying into the scene. They weren't there one moment ago, and then they are there. Obviously, if this pilot knew he was flying into a flock of geese or birds, whatever they were, he would have done things a little bit differently. They must have just materialized there.
That's good.
I also gave you the quick highlights of this thing, but in those manuals, they've told the pilots, if you hear this, it probably means this happened from birds. If you feel this, it means this happened from birds. So this thing goes on for about 8 pages online.
Yeah, it's funny because just looking at some past bird strikes in the year 2008, an owl that was sucked into the engine of a Boeing 747. The captain said he was able to hear some pinging and some slight vibration, and then afterwards, after the landing, they were able to see that the housing was disrupted and then repair it. Obviously did not cause a complete engine failure like we have here in this case, where both engines were reportedly disabled. Let's go to Sean Hennessy right now, who's on the West Side Highway with more details on the scene for us. Sean?
Chris, we can tell you that the West Side Highway is halfway closed, halfway open. The northbound line, as you can see behind us, is open, traffic flowing nicely, and ambulances and police cars keep on going by. They've been doing this for the past 20 minutes, half hour, ever since this happened, even longer, obviously. On the other side, you can see that's been shut down. Police cars and ambulances and emergency service vehicles have been here ever since this all happened. The southbound highway has been shut down, but police cars and ambulances keep on going down south as the plane keeps on going south. And it certainly has been an area where a lot of people have been watching over on the other side of the West Side Highway. Police are over there with police tape and caution tape, keeping people away to make sure that they don't get too close to the water. And on the other side of the tape has been divers and police searchers, just making sure that no one else has been hurt, has been taken away in ambulances, things like that. So right now, West Side Highway northbound is going fine. Southbound, not so much. It's been shut down. Traffic about 8 blocks away has been rerouted back up to the north, certainly causing traffic jams way up north, but here on the southbound side, it's been all systems go for ambulances and tow trucks and police vehicles. Guys, back to you.
All right, Sean, the people out there, if you do have to commute, stay away from the West Side Highway. Just leave it be for the emergency vehicles right now. They've got enough things going on down there. Avoid the West Side Highway. That's, I guess, certainly a bit of information people hopefully take to heart here.
It is now 5:18, and for those of you who haven't joined us for the past 2 hours or so, let's just update you on what has transpired here in the Hudson River in New York City this afternoon. A US Airways flight was taking off from LaGuardia Airport on its way to Charlotte, North Carolina. It was in the air for about 3 minutes. This is according to the FAA. It was in the air for about 3 minutes when apparently a flock of birds, Senator Charles Schumer referred to them as a flock of geese, the plane ran into this flock of birds and down went 2 of the engines. The passengers on board reported hearing just a loud boom. They started to see smoke, and that is when the pilot alerted the passenger and the crew that the plane was going down. Heroically, this pilot did everything that he needed to do by the book, and he brought this plane down. Witnesses say that it looked like a controlled, almost, I don't want to say landing, but the pilot did have control of this plane as he landed. As we continue here to look at raw video of some of the rescue crews arriving to the scene to take care of some of the victims from this crash. But getting back to the story, this pilot did bring down the plane, immediately opened the doors, and that is when the passengers started to deplane. Many of them got onto the wings of the plane to be rescued. The Coast Guard, boats from the New York waterways, all rushed to the scene to take care of all of these passengers. Dive crews did rushed to the scene as well to make sure that all of the passengers were off the plane. They did at least 2 passes that we can tell you. And right now, the FAA and also the CEO of US Airways does confirm that everyone has been accounted for. Everyone has been accounted for. There have been no reports of any fatalities. However, we do believe that there are some serious injuries that rescuers and doctors are attending to. Now, speaking of some of those victims, let's go right now to Roosevelt Hospital. John Slattery is standing by with an update on that. John?
Yeah, we were just talking to the head of the public relations here and an emergency room doctor just a few moments ago. They expect about 12 to 15 patients to be brought here after being triaged near the site of the crash. So far, the people who've been brought here have been treated for hypothermia and apparently nothing more. A few moments ago, we spoke with Dr. Gabriel Wilson. Here he is.
This is basic standard hypothermia treatment for anyone who has exposure. Depending on the degree of hypothermia, we'll be either passive rewarming people if they have mild hypothermia where it's just basic blankets, to if they have moderate to severe hypothermia, putting them in more active rewarming or actually putting in devices, vascular devices, where we can more rapidly rewarm people.
All right, now what we have here at the hospital right now are 2 women and 1 man. One of the women is the wife of the gentleman. They refer to them as a husband and wife who came in here, both being treated for hypothermia, and also a stewardess, flight attendant who was on the airplane. She also, we're told, is being treated for hypothermia. We asked Dr. Wilson if they were being treated for anything else. He said he didn't think so, that there didn't appear to be anything visible, any other injury, but he said they always do check for further complications such as pregnancy and things like that. He led us to believe that the treatment in the hospital was well underhand and their treatment for hypothermia was of the garden variety, that there was nothing unusual here, and felt that they could well handle the number that they expect, and they are told by the command center that that could be as high as 12 or 15 patients. So people being treated here, hospital says everything is under control. What a relief. Reporting live from Roosevelt, John Slattery, CBS 2 News.
Everybody has really stepped up in action here, John. Okay, thanks. We'll check back in with you shortly. Let's now go on the phone with Coast Guard Petty Officer Seth Johnson, who joins us right now. Petty Officer, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Speaking with Chris and Christine here at CBS 2. Your first reaction to this and your first response?
The first response by the Coast Guard was at 3:31. We get a report that there was an Airbus that went down in the water near the Intrepid Air and Space Museum, and we quickly launched assets from Coast Guard Station New York and Coast Guard Station Sandy Hook.
After your crews arrived there, take us through what they are trained to do. Take us through what exactly transpired on those waters in the Hudson River today.
The Coast Guard is currently working search and rescue operations in the area. We're trained to get there very quickly, especially in situations where the water temperature is 36 degrees like it is today. Hypothermia can set in very quickly, and the crews they do their best to get everybody safely aboard and treat them.
Can you give us just a little bit of an insight as to some of the other Coast Guard members, just the reactions from some of the passengers that they were plucking off the wings and plucking them to safety? They must have just had this look of fear on their faces.
I can't, sir. I wasn't on scene.
Can you tell us exactly how many boats the U.S. Coast Guard sent to the scene, exactly how many crew members you sent there?
I don't have the number of crew members, ma'am, but we have a total of 9 Coast Guard vessels that responded to this, and one of them, the Coast Guard cutter Ridley, is acting as the on-scene commander. So what they're basically doing, that would be the larger Coast Guard vessel. They basically coordinate the search and rescue operations and keep up communications between the vessels as they're rescuing people.
Petty Officer, now that you've been able to ascertain that everyone has been removed safely from the aircraft, now what's the next step? What will the Coast Guard do now? Do you stay on site?
Right now, sir, we have 35 confirmed rescues. I don't know the total number of people that were on board.
Also, I know that the U.S. Coast Guard is involved in rescues almost on a daily basis. But, you know, all of that aside, seriously, this is no typical day at the office for the U.S. Coast Guard today.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Can you repeat your question?
I'm just trying to get your sense of, you know, today, it's not your typical day at the office. With all due respect, I know that the U.S. Coast Guard, that's your business, is to rescue people and to help people in danger. But to have a U.S. Airways flight crash into the Hudson River, this does not happen every day in New York City.
No, ma'am. It certainly does not happen every day.
So your training, I mean, that is when everything gets kicked into gear, and I have to just congratulate you and the rest of your crew there today for a job well done.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Petty Officer, thank you for joining us. We have an update here. The Air Traffic Controllers Union official has said that the U.S. Airways pilot reported what is called a double bird strike, which is airline pilot jargon for both engines being disabled by birds. Less than a minute after takeoff, and was headed for an emergency landing in New Jersey when he was able to ditch the aircraft into the Hudson River. Now, the National Air Traffic Controllers Union spokesman Doug Church says the Airbus 320 reported the bird strikes about 30 to 45 seconds after takeoff from LaGuardia and asked to return to the ground. As the controller began to turn the aircraft, the pilot radioed that he saw an airport below him and asked what it was. Church then said that the controller in Westbury, New Jersey replied, "That's Teterboro." The pilot asked to land there. The last transmission between the pilot and the controller was the controller's order to divert to Teterboro, New Jersey for an emergency landing. As we now know, the plane was not able to make it to Teterboro, which, as you know, is a smaller private aircraft landing strip in New Jersey. And the pilot did successfully bring the plane down intact into the Hudson River, and that's where we stand right now. NTSB, they're going to be holding a news conference shortly, and we will, of course, bring that to you. We heard from the CEO, Doug Parker of US Airways, who is now en route to New York to assess the situation here on the ground. But the one thing we can tell you, we can't reiterate this enough, 150 passengers on board. All 150 have been accounted for. We don't have official word on the extent of all the injuries at this point, but the captain, 2 pilots, the crew, 3 flight attendants did nothing short of a miraculous job of making sure everyone was able to get off the plane expeditiously.
Most certainly, Chris, and all these witness accounts that we're hearing today back up your statement there. Let's go to another man who witnessed this plane coming down today. His name is Dale Cunningham, and he joins us on the phone right now. Dale, where were you when you saw this plane coming down?
I live in a high-rise apartment in Fort Lee, New Jersey, approximately across from Columbia Presbyterian Hospital on the 19th floor. I looked out my window at 3:30 and saw this giant jet traveling extremely low down the river at altitude that is unusual for flight patterns here. I've been living here for 25 years. I've never seen a jet that low before.
So obviously you see a jet flying low in the area and you think, okay, something is seriously wrong here.
Absolutely. In fact, my first reaction was terrorism because I was here for 9/11 and witnessed the Trade Centers going down from my terrace with my wife. And that, of course, sticks in your memory. And I did not think of crash. I thought of this plane traveling low and maybe taken over by terrorists, and thought that maybe they would drive it into another high-rise building in New York City.
So how did the plane look as it was going down, as it was heading towards the water? Did it look as though the pilot had the plane under control?
Absolutely. I saw no fire from the engines. It was a steady flight. The plane was not shaking. It was not dipping at all. That's what seems so unusual to me. I must have seen that plane go down to about 96th Street. Let's say I'm at 165th Street approximately, and the plane seemed to be traveling at same rate of speed and probably the same height at that time. Well controlled plane.
So you did not see the impact?
No, I did not, because the river turns at about 96th Street, and even when I went out to my terrace, I could not see the plane after that.
Dale, could you hear anything? I mean, even with your windows closed on a cold day like today, you're going to hear the engines if it's or did you not hear the engines?
Yeah,
because we know the engines were apparently disabled.
Planes fly up and down this corridor all the time.
Yeah.
A lot higher with the passenger planes, not so high with the small engines, and helicopters constantly, and you can hear engines all the time. I heard nothing unusual. I saw no fires coming from the engines at all. It looked like a normal flight, other than the plane being exceptionally low. I would say, again, no more than 20
20, 22 stories up.
Dale, I'm just curious, when the plane went out of your sight, what did you do next?
I went out to my terrace and tried to see the plane continue on, again, fearing that it was a possible terrorist plot that was going to go into another New York City high-rise office building. And I actually reached over my terrace, bent over, and could not see the plane any further. And I then went upstairs. I have a duplex apartment, turned on the TV, and probably a minute later or 30 seconds later, I do watch CBS, saw that the news came on and reported breaking news that a plane had crashed in the Hudson River. Then I knew it was that plane.
All right, Dale, thank you for taking the time and providing your eyewitness account. That's Dale Cunningham, who saw the plane from his terrace. Dale, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Okay, 5:30 here on CBS 2, as we've been following for the greater part of the last about 2 hours here. Flight 1549 en route from LaGuardia to Charlotte, North Carolina, making an emergency landing in the Hudson River. Let's go to the point of origin right now, which is LaGuardia Airport, and our Jennifer McLogan is standing by there live for us right now. Jennifer?
Good evening from LaGuardia Airport. We're standing right now in front of the US Airways terminal. We'll set the scene for you. Down this way, you'll see flashing lights. Now, just inside the lobby, in front of those flashing lights, there are a number of monitors that show canceled US Airways flights, canceled and delayed, especially to Charlotte. Now, the runway beyond me here is open. Planes are taking off and landing. We were speaking with passengers departing tonight, and in fact I spoke with one woman who was supposed to have been on the plane that went down. They are unnerved, but they are pleased with initial reports that they're hearing that those US Airways pilots who just mere hours ago were taking off on this tarmac that you're looking at right now were so skilled and calm and level-headed that they were able to land safely and save all those lives. Families now of loved ones are being asked to reunite at the Crown Plaza across the street from here. So far, some Port Authority police officers have told me that just 2 families have shown. The rest have chosen to go down to the hospitals down on over in Manhattan. That is the latest here at LaGuardia Airport in front of the US Airways terminal. I'm Jennifer McLogan, CBS 2 News.
All right, Jennifer, let's check back in now with Hazel Sanchez. Hazel, what is the latest that you have on your end?
Again, Christine, we are on the corner of West 40th Street and 12th Avenue, right across the street from the ferry terminal, which became the Triage Center for all of the victims of this plane crash. What we have noticed within the last half hour is that most of the victims who needed the most serious care have been taken away to local hospitals by those ambulances. There are still a few remaining ambulances here treating some victims inside that Triage Center, but from what we are told, most of them have been taken away from here. Red Cross is also in there providing some assistance to some of the emergency workers who are here who have come to the aid of these passengers. It is extremely cold out here, so they are probably helping out those workers who have been out here in this freezing cold for so many hours now. If you can pan out a little bit more, you can notice that this area has quieted down significantly. You don't see as many flashing red lights here. There are still emergency crews here, as I had mentioned, but most of the ambulances have cleared away from here. There are quite a few NYPD vehicles. The Police Communications Division command post is now also set down here at this area. But most of the people that you see scattered around in this area are either emergency crew workers or the media themselves, and then just curious onlookers. I did run into Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer, who came here to see what the situation was and to see what he could possibly do to help out here. But the one thing that he said to me was that he could not praise the city workers and all of the emergency crew workers who came to the aid of the passengers and the crew members of this downed plane today. He said, interestingly enough, during the mayor's State of the City speech earlier today, he had just been mentioning how great the city workers were in responding to emergency situations, and then literally about an hour later, this plane went down here in the Hudson, and all of those city workers and emergency crews proved the mayor right. But that is the story here live on the west side. Hazel Sanchez, CBS 2 News.
All right, Hazel, thank you. Yes, major kudos today to all the first responders that responded so quickly in helping pluck these passengers from these freezing cold waters, about 40-degree water in the Hudson right now. You know what the air temperature is like out there. It's been freezing all day, well below freezing. And also the 2 pilots and the 3 flight attendants on board who did their work heroic, nothing short of miraculous to get all 155 passengers and crew off this plane safely. As I've mentioned a number of times, we don't want to give away the severity of any injuries because those reports are still coming in. But once again, the CEO of US Airways en route to New York right now didn't want to speculate as to what caused this earlier, but an air traffic controllers union official says the airline's pilot, the US Airways pilot, reported what is called a double bird strike less than a minute after takeoff from LaGuardia. And this is flight 1549 from LaGuardia to Charlotte. Both engines taken out by what seems to have been a flock of geese that the plane accidentally flew right into, or the birds flew into the engines, however you want to pose it. But the pilot just did what can only be described as a miraculous landing here on the Hudson River. Originally tried to divert back to the airport to make an emergency landing. Obviously, with both engines flaming out, that was not possible. The Hudson River was the next best option. And like I mentioned, all crew and passengers accounted for and off, which is nothing short of miraculous.
Well, as we continue to bring you live breaking news coverage of this plane crash in the Hudson River this afternoon, we are pulling in all of our resources to give you the very latest information, and that includes our network resources from CBS News. Bob Orr joins us now on the phone. And Bob, we understand that a news conference is going to be taking place soon, so if I interrupt you, please forgive me, but we are standing by for a news conference.
Sure.
In the meantime, Bob, what's the latest that you have?
Well, an NTSB GO team is leaving here in a few minutes from Washington to go to New York, and the first thing they're going to do is they will secure the crash site and retrieve the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, the flight data recorder, so that we have an actual statistic idea of what this plane did. But from anecdotal reports, what the pilots did, as you've been reporting, was miraculous. And truly heroic. For example, the plane was only in the air about 5 minutes. The FAA says 3 minutes, but a tracking service that looks at all commercial flights puts it more at 5 minutes. Got as high as 3,200 feet. But get this, as the plane lost power and was coming down, when it was just 300 feet above the surface, it was still going 170 miles an hour. There's no room for error. The pilot had one chance to put it down safely. He's threading it through some very tall buildings, as you know, in Manhattan and in Newark, and he puts it down in the Hudson River in such a way that it takes most of the speed off the plane, it doesn't break the plane, and everyone is able to get out. It really, truly is a remarkable job by these pilots.
Bob, you've had a chance to talk to some people, I'm sure, over the last couple of hours. I know all of our response as laymen, from where we're sitting at least, not necessarily from where you're sitting, is that this is a miraculous landing. The people that you're talking to, are they basically echoing those same thoughts that this was just a one in a million type shot?
Exactly. I mean, they're almost euphoric. In talking to veteran crash investigators, they just shake their heads and say that things were just right today. They all lined up the right way. In accidents, we usually talk about a chain of events causing the accident. A series of things goes wrong, and then that leads to an accident. Today, after a series of things went wrong, a series of very right things happened in the right sequence with only one shot and no room for error, and somehow these guys pulled it off. Now, before we get too far out on this limb of praise, we have to say that when we look at the black boxes and we look at what's happening in that plane from a mechanical standpoint and a system standpoint, and when we look at what the pilots and the crew members are telling the passengers, we may have to back off just a little bit. But from all appearances, it seems that what happened there, first of all, was extremely rare. And then the fact that they were able to save this plane, save these people, is just truly amazing.
Well, Bob, let me ask you, what can you do? I mean, we're hearing a double bird strike and a flock of geese. I mean, can a pilot traveling at that rate of speed, I mean, does it show up on radar? Is there any way of avoiding something like that?
Birds are a problem, and birds have been a problem in aviation for a long time, and that's why at many airports, I know at D.C. Reagan, and I believe at LaGuardia, they use noise devices like sporadic cannon fire devices to scatter birds. It's why that you don't have things like city dumps near runways and anything that would attract like large flocks of birds. They're very dangerous to planes when they're taking off. At high altitude, obviously not a problem. Birds have brought down a lot of military planes, but I will tell you, we've done some research, and the only commercial crash that we can find going back in time that's attributable to bird strike was in 1960 in Boston. and several dozen people were killed there in an Eastern Airlines crash. Birds do hit planes from time to time. And from time to time, in a serious incident, an engine can be lost. It is extremely rare to lose both engines, and it's cataclysmic to lose both engines that close to the ground. And the fact that it did not lead to a calamity here is truly remarkable.
Bob, I just want to interrupt you very briefly. Before, we had a double box on our screen, and to the left of your screen there, you saw a podium. There it is once again. We're waiting for a news conference. We are going to be hearing from Mayor Mike Bloomberg, also Governor David Paterson, and I'm also being told that we are going to hear from at least one pilot during this news conference. So we will obviously have a lot of questions answered when we hear from this pilot from this US Airways flight today. But Bob, you know, in the meantime, as we continue to wait for this news conference to happen, you know, you mentioned that the black box obviously will be analyzed. How long of a process does that take, and how soon will we get that information?
We should have a fairly fast confirmation of the major questions. Now, just so you understand, these are digital recorders, and they're recording hundreds of parameters from the airplane. What position is the gear? What position is the nose of the airplane? Are the elevators up or down? Are the ailerons deployed or not? So there's all kinds of technical data that these investigators will look at. But what they're going to look at is, what was the performance of the engine? When did he have full power? When did he lose full power? Did it happen in a sequence? Did it happen at the same time? How quickly did he lose altitude? And then most importantly, what kinds of maneuvers did he have to do with essentially a dead airplane to bring it down in a flat ditch landing? I don't even call this a crash. This is more like a purposeful ditching. In a perfect world, he would have found some pavement. In New York City, with all of the congestion there, the fact that he found anything where he didn't hit anybody on the ground and he saved everybody on the airplane, apparently, is an amazing thing to me.
Well, CBS's Bob Orr, thank you again for joining us, Bob, and we'll be looking for you on the evening news tonight. But thank you once again for taking the time. CBS's Bob Orr. Let's go to Gloria Schaefer, an eyewitness to today's events. Gloria, good evening to you.
Hello.
Just describe what you did see, your initial thoughts when you did see this all unfold before your eyes.
Well, it was completely unreal. I was sitting in my living room. I live on the 16th floor, and I was just looking out at the Hudson, and I see this plane coming down, slow and steady, but it's clearly like descending, and I'm thinking to myself, this can't be possibly going to Newark because I'm seeing it over the water. And initially I'm thinking, you know, terror attack, you know, what any probably other New Yorker would think when they see this, but it was coming down so slow and steady as if it was going to land on concrete instead of water. And then, you know, shortly thereafter, it disappeared out of view by the buildings blocking me to the south. And I waited until I started to see news coverage to see what had happened. I mean, it was the worst thing to see, because you're watching this plane coming down and you're thinking, oh my God, are these people all about to die? And it was like watching the planes on 9/11 all over again.
I think most people the eyewitnesses that saw this unfold today thought this was a terrorist act. Was that your first inclination to think that this was something similar to 9/11?
Absolutely. I didn't think that there was any rational reason for a plane to be coming down. I didn't think it was a movie set. I didn't think it was, you know, a plane taking tourists around New York City. It was, you know, a huge airplane coming down over the Hudson.
Now, how miraculous is it, now that you've had a chance to see the pictures and hear us talk over the last few hours, that all 155 passengers and crew on board have been pulled to safety? It's got to be, when you said a second ago that you thought all these people were basically crashing to their death there, to now hear that that's not the case.
I just thank God. I mean, all these families, I mean, all these people who are on these planes, I mean, my heart and my prayers go out to them, because I can't imagine what it is to live through this kind of ordeal. And I'm just so happy that it had a happy ending.
Well, Gloria, thank you very much for getting in touch with us, and we appreciate you sharing your firsthand account. Gloria
Thanks.
Schaefer, who was an eyewitness today. One thing we can tell you right now, we are getting word that there are 78 injuries. Of the 155 crew and passengers plucked from Flight 1549, 78 injuries. Also, we're getting word that there were a number of Bank of America Corporation and Wells Fargo employees on this flight. Not confirming any of the injured are people from either of those banks, but that's just another tidbit of information that we've been handed here.
Well, Chris, we have sent obviously our reporters across the area to get every angle of the story. Jay Dow is in Weehawken getting the very latest information for us on that end. Jay, let's check back in with you. What do you have?
Oh, well, we're at the New York Waterway Terminal, Arthur's Landing here in Weehawken, and we just heard that there are 78 injuries, 78 people injured on that flight. A number of them are inside the terminal here, just inside where you see several police officers behind that. We'll be able to feed you some video shortly of passengers who are wrapped up in blankets. Periodically, they are wheeled out on stretchers, shaking, looking banged up. They are obviously distressed. We've heard so much from so many eyewitnesses who talk about this perfect landing. There are several people who live here on North Bergen, up on the cliff, who were down here on Arthur's Landing waiting for a ferry. They saw everything happen as the plane came down from the George Washington Bridge. They described it as a runway on water, that the pilot did a magnificent job of gliding this plane down on into the Hudson River. And, you want to say it was luck, you want to say it was fate. You have the New York Waterway Terminal here, and you had several boats that were ready to be at service. And obviously we had a couple of doctors who were here who attended to passengers. At least one of those passengers fell into the water. The doctor is telling us that he noticed that the passenger was displaying obvious clinical signs of hypothermia. No-brainer. It's cold out here. The water's even colder. We'll be able to bring you some of those interviews in a short while, but obviously we have a chaotic scene here with several police departments, several emergency responders on scene, catering and dealing with many of these passengers who are shook up this evening. Back to you.
All right, Jay, thanks. Bring us your information when you do get it. You're looking at pictures now taken earlier tonight, of course. Flight 1549 leaving LaGuardia en route for Charlotte, making an emergency ditch landing here in the Hudson River. The plane took off at 3:26 Eastern time earlier today, according to reports, only in the air for a time period between 3 and 5 minutes, only achieving an altitude of about 3,200 feet. Both engines out due to a flock of geese making contact with the engines and flaming out. Both engines rendering the plane, this Airbus 320, disabled and in need of a landing strip. And these pilots, thinking as quickly as they possibly could with their crew and passengers, their first priority, were able to successfully ditch this plane, call it a crash landing if you like, in the Hudson River. And all 155 passengers and crew plucked from these icy waters of the Hudson. It's incredible. And speaking with Bob over a second ago, you can't sing the praises of the crew enough. Who knows what happens leading up to this crash, and we'll find that out from the black box and
also from this news conference, hopefully as well, Chris, where one of the pilots is expected to be at this news conference along with the mayor and also the governor. Let's check back in with Lonnie Quinn. Lonnie, obviously one of the conditions that rescuers and these passengers and crew were working up against are these frigid temperatures outside today.
Outside of what has happened today on the Hudson River, the big story would have been the weather. Well, you're right, Christine. Frigid air pouring into the tri-state. As of right now, what we see out there, just a few sporadic cloud-covered banks here and there, a little bit of a snow flurry, but not so bad out there. In terms of what we dealt with at the time of the crash, you'll see just a little bit of snow in the atmosphere. Nothing's really accumulating out there, but let's zoom in tight. Right around the Intrepid Museum, your current temperature reading, 20 degrees. Now, I've been staying on top of this ever since the crash happened at around 3:30, I guess, and the temperatures have hovered around 20, maybe 21 degrees, so no change there. A lot of people are talking about, well, what are the winds doing, perhaps, because we've been saying here in the Weather Center, the winds are going to pick up. They're going to be the big weather story. They were not the big weather story at the time of this crash, only blowing anywhere between 10, possibly a maximum of 12 or 13 miles per hour. That is not going to affect a big airliner like that, but we want to spend some time talking about that water temperature, all right? Yeah, it's 20 degrees outside, but the water holds on to the heat a little bit more as you go into your winter, but it is about anywhere between 38 to maybe 41 or 42 degrees. Frigid cold water out there, and of course hypothermia does set in very quickly if someone was to be out swimming in the water. We were watching the pictures. A lot of people seem to be standing on the wings, but we heard some people in the crash say, hey, we had to walk through the water as it was coming into the plane, and then we heard from Jay Dow saying one passenger was actually into the water itself. That is a tough kind of temperature to be submerged in. All right, guys, we're going to continue to monitor everything. Let's get back to you at the news desk.
All right, Lonnie, thank you. We will check back in with you shortly. As you can see on your screen right now, the governor and the mayor's news conference will be starting momentarily, and we will, of course, have that for you live here on CBS 2 as we continue to look at these pictures. Now, we spoke with Al Yerman earlier, who is an aviation expert, and he's been with us periodically throughout this broadcast. Al, now that you've had a chance to kind of take this all in and see exactly what unfolded, your thoughts on what we've seen transpire here in this captain's actions, this pilot's actions?
Well, the captain did an outstanding job. The whole crew did an outstanding job. I mean, you've got to realize that only seconds before you have to make a decision on what your emergency is and your course of action, this pilot reacted very quickly, very professionally, and very safely. He picked the right area, ditched the aircraft in the proper manner without damaging the aircraft any further, and people were able to get out. It's just outstanding.
Al, at those type of airspeeds, we're talking in excess of 170 miles an hour at that altitude with the angle the plane's coming in. This is a one-shot deal. How... I don't want to say 1 in a million, but is this a 1 in a million type shot, I guess, to get this plane down safely? We've only got one pass at it.
You only have one pass at it, right, because you have absolutely no power. You have to line up right with the water and the waves. It appears that the water's kind of calm, and then set up the angle of the aircraft so the touchdown just right with the tail touching first, and the whole procedure and the whole emergency procedure was just done in an outstanding manner.
Does it get any more difficult than this? If you're a pilot and you're going through the manual of, okay, worst case scenarios, to lose both engines, to have no terra firma below the wheels, does it get any worse than this, with the exception of maybe a massive fire on board?
It's very bad, and it can't get that much worse because you have absolutely no control of the aircraft as far as if you have to extend your glide, or you have no power. You have no way. It's just like if in your car, your engine goes out and you're rolling down a hill or something. You have your brakes, but you have to do everything just right. They have no way to control the aircraft with power, and this is again, it's an outstanding job by the crew.
All right, Al.
I'm sorry, Chris. Just one more question for Al before we let him go. Al, I have a question regarding bird strikes and the ability for the control tower to detect a flock of birds on their radar and then conveying that to the pilot. As we were talking to Lonnie earlier about this, and he explained that obviously birds are a creature of nature, and they're constantly on the move. But if in fact this was a rather large flock of birds, how does the communication between the control tower and these pilots happen? What takes place?
Well, if it's detected on the controller's radar that there are birds in the area, and especially in the path of the departure, warn the pilot. Be advised, there's a flock of birds at such and such a heading from where the airplane is, and they give them an advisory on the birds.
All right, Al, thank you very much. That's Al Yerman, our aviation expert, who's talking with us right now. Now you're looking at live pictures. Mayor Bloomberg, you see Governor David Patterson, Christine Quinn in the background, Nick Scapetta in the background as well, the fire commissioner. And they're going to be coming out to speak here in moments, and we were going to bring this to you live here on CBS 2 as we're continuing to monitor these developments here at this US Airways crash on the Hudson River today.
Chris, they're at the New York Waterway Terminal located on 40th and the West Side Highway. This is one of the major go-to points, I guess you could say, during this rescue mission that took place here this afternoon. This is where a lot of the rescue crews took the passengers, the victims of this plane crash, to have them treated. And once again, here we see Mayor Bloomberg approaching the podium as we continue to monitor the situation live for you right here on CBS 2. The mayor is going to give us the very latest that he has. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and let him listen in.
Easy, easy, easy. Okay. Time out until we get everybody settled. Let me tell you what we know happened and what we don't know yet. Obviously, a twin-engine plane went down in the Hudson River, and we have reason to believe that there were 155 people, including crew, roughly, and that we think all got out safely. Now, the reason I'm saying we believe and we think is that some were taken to New Jersey and some were taken to this side of the Hudson River. Most were picked up by New York Waterways boats, and we have Alan Warner, the harbor master, here, and some were picked up by Circle Line boats, and we think some might have been picked up by Coast Guard, PD, and FVNY boats. So we are trying to verify every single person that was on that boat, make sure that they are accounted for. But there is no reason to believe at the moment that this wasn't something that we should thank God for, that everybody got out safely, and we do not believe that there are any serious injuries. A few people were taken to the hospital. They're in stable condition. A few people wanted to go to the hospital. They may or may not by this time have arrived. But it would appear that the pilot did a masterful job of landing the plane in the river and then making sure that everybody got out. I had a long conversation with the pilot. He walked the plane twice after everybody else was off and tried to verify that there was nobody else on board and assures us there were not. I also talked to a passenger who said he was the last one up the aisle and that he made sure there was nobody behind him. But the information is still subject to slight variations because there were some passengers on board where the manifest doesn't show them or does show them, and we're trying to get an accurate list from US Airways. But the first and most important thing is this pilot did a wonderful job, and it would appear that all roughly 155, including crew and one infant, got out safely. The second thing that you should know is that the actual cause of the accident will be investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board. I talked to Mary Peters, the head of the U.S. Department of Transportation. The FAA is under them. The NTSB is a separate independent agency, but she informed me that they were leaving Washington National Airport with their normal team that goes to any wrecks, and they will arrive here roughly 7:30, and they will be the ones that will do an investigation, and they will make no conclusions in advance. So all of the speculation on what really happened here is just speculation, and the NTSB is going to do their normal, careful, thoughtful, and competent review of what actually happened. But the most important thing, let me come back to, and that is that all the passengers got out safely, we think. I did talk to the mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, where the plane was going, Pat McCrory. He said we met a couple times, and I said the governor and I will buy him a drink the next time he comes to New York, but he called to say thank you very much for treating all the people who are going to Charlotte or lived in Charlotte. Every report the governor got, they were just over the top with the kind of hospitality that we showed. I pointed out this is not normally the way people arrive in New York City, but nevertheless, as long as they're all got on safely, I think everything else is secondary. There are some phone numbers if anybody watching is worried about a passenger. US Air has a number, 1-800-679-8215. That's 679-8215. And you can also call 311 if you live outside of New York City. Remember, the number for 311 is 212-NEWYOK. And we will try to make sure that you get the information that you are looking for. In terms of the response, the FDNY and the NYPD and the Port Authority Police all work together. This is one of those events which, under our agreement, there's joint responsibility, both the police department and the fire department, and I think what you saw was, once again, them working together. They plan for these kinds of emergencies, they train for these kinds of emergencies, and you saw it in action because of their fast, brave work. We think that contributed to the fact that it looks like everybody is safe. The police commissioner had a couple of divers in the water. One or two of them went into the plane. They did get some people who actually went into the water. An awful lot of people stepped right onto ferries that pulled up next to the plane or right up to the wings where they were able to get out on the wings. But this unified command that we have and the Office of Emergency Management's assistance, everything did seem to work as well as you would hope that it would work. We got some assistance from the state. They were asked to send in some air resources, and Michael Balboni, who's here, said they did. And now I thought it'd be nice to hear from the governor. The governor's staff could not have been more cooperative. Anything that we asked for, we got right away. Governor Patterson?
Upon information and belief, there is an heroic pilot who saved himself and approximately 154 other passengers this afternoon. We've had a miracle on 34th Street. I believe now we've had a miracle in the Hudson. This was potentially a very tragic incident. This pilot somehow, without any engines, was able to land this plane, and perhaps without any serious injuries to any of the passengers. The effort was assisted by ferries in the water, New York Waterways ferries, the Circle Line, also the Coast Guard got involved. The agencies of the city and the state collaborated. Our Department of Environmental Protection will now help as part of the investigation. The NTSB will be here shortly to have a full investigation of the plane, the runway which has been shut down. But I think for all the times that we've had to appear at these press conferences in rather dismal circumstances, this is a day to realize how blessed this city is and how all of us are as New Yorkers, and to the families and those who survived. There was a retired policeman named Wendell Fox from Charlotte who I spoke to, and he said that he participated in these types of rescues and he'd never seen anything this magnificent as coming off of a plane into the water and looking up and seeing all those ferries coming to rescue them. There's another passenger whose name I won't give, but says that his brother died in the attack on our country on September 11th. So he is no stranger to tragedy, but he said he's a very blessed person today. So I think that in simplicity, this is really a potential tragedy that may have become one of the most spectacular days in the history of New York City's agencies, its coordination, and the greatness of the people who work here and all they did for those passengers who are now, tonight, going to go home to their families.
Governor, thank you. I should point out that we have our borough president, Scott Stringer, and Speaker of the City Council, Chris Quinn, with us, as well as Chris Ward, who's the executive director of the Port Authority, and, of course, Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, Fire Commissioner Nick Scapetter, and OEM Commissioner Joe Bruno here with us. I've probably missed a whole bunch of people, but I apologize. We have the chief of the PAPD police here as well. But I think what you're seeing, the reason there's so many people here is we know how to respond, we know how to work together, and clearly in this case, people benefited. We'd be happy to take a few questions, sir.
Since you said you talked to the pilot, what did he walk you through as to what he felt, what happened?
He did not. He was very careful in what he talked about, and I think that's the kind of training that you would expect of a veteran pilot. They don't speculate. They're going to talk to the NAS, the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and that's exactly what they should do. What he did talk about was to assure us that he had walked the plane a couple of times to make sure that there was nobody left. And after that, he's going to wait and talk to the people that he should have. I might also point out that the plane itself is now down in about Battery Park City and is tied up to a pier. And eventually it'll be pulled out and they'll do a complete investigation on every part of it. Miss?
Mr. Mayor, several witnesses that I spoke to said that about several minutes into the flight they heard a big boom, a crash. And so the question that they had and the question that I have is there any indication that there was any kind of terrorism or what caused the boom?
Absolutely no indication whatsoever. As a matter of fact, people are about as sure as you can be without pulling the plane out of the water yet that there was nothing other than an accident that may have had to do with both engines for reasons that the NTSB will decide, failing at exactly the same time. A very unlikely occurrence in a two-engine plane. Generally, if they lose one engine, they can fly just fine. Sir.
I want to speculate that there had been some reports of birds hitting the engine. Did you hear those, and what credence is being given to that?
I did not. I've heard lots of speculation, but credence is not something that is up to us to give or to withhold. The reason air travel is so safe is that the National Transportation Safety Board does a very thorough, careful, scientific investigation. Their results take time, days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And based on that, we constantly improve the safety procedures for airplanes and for airspace and for airports. And we just should not be speculating, and we're not going to miss.
Can you tell us what happened to the infant upon impact, and what, if any,
we don't know, but apparently there was no. One of the passengers said to me, the pilot said over the intercom, or one of the crew said over the intercom, "Brace yourself," and I can only assume whoever was holding the baby did it, but the baby was certainly not injured, so there's no indication of that whatsoever. Pardon? The baby is in New Jersey, so we have, the police commissioner points out, so we haven't had time to talk. So.
All about, you touched on it though, about the injuries, how serious they are. Are they from impact injuries? Are they from hypothermia?
We have absolutely no knowledge. Basically, the people who went to the hospital were very few, and they were in stable condition, did not appear to the EMS that talked to me to be seriously injured. But for safety reasons, they sent them. Sir?
Can you talk a little bit about what the pilot told you as far as the chronology of...
He did not discuss it at all. He's waiting to talk to the NTSB, and that's what he should do. Miss?
To confirm, this flight was going from LaGuardia to Charlotte.
That's
and one
correct.
witness that I spoke to said that 3 minutes into the flight, only 3 minutes, the captain came on and said that we've had engine failure and to brace yourself.
Well, the plane is just, 2 miles out of LaGuardia. It would have been a time frame just about that. As soon as they take off, they were heading south. He managed to, I'm told, tried to turn around and landed on the Hudson. But all I can tell you for sure is he landed in the Hudson, and it would appear that he did a masterful job and everybody got out safely. I thought it might be interesting. You might want to hear from Alan Warren, who is the harbor master for New York Waterways. Circle Line and New York Waterways had their ferries out there. They jumped up right away and probably saved an awful lot of lives. Alan?
Okay, I'd just like to, Warren, W-A-R-R-E-N, Alan, A-L-A-N.
Your title?
I'm the Director of Ferry Operations for New York Waterway. I'd like to recognize Arthur Imperator Jr. is here with the company. His family owns the company. This is not the first time that we've come and did something like this. I just want to commend my crew members back there. They're the guys who really did it. NYPD, New York Police Department, Circle Line, all the other maritime companies, U.S. Coast Guard, and I'm glad no one got seriously hurt and there's no fatalities.
You heard the plane, you saw the plane, what did you do?
As soon as my guys heard the plane, 4 boats were on site immediately. My office dispatched as many boats as we had at that time. At this point, I'm guessing 14 at the most on site, as others were bringing passengers to the terminals. Office personnel came down. We helped set triage up in Pier 79 here in our Port Imperial Ferry Terminal in Weehawken. Assistance from all the public agencies. And
When you first heard it, what did you say?
I've been with the company 12 years now, and we don't think. We just react. And everyone kind of knows what they do, from the people in the office answering the phones to the people on the ferries. Everyone steps up and
To pull out
Getting passengers from the plane out to the boat.
Well, we drill all the time on safety. We have an active training program, first aid CPR, which members are actively going through right now. We have platforms and cradles that lower on a boat. Our crews are trained in them. They train once every couple weeks on this. We go through U.S. Coast Guard training drills. Like I said, these guys are the ones who really did it. They just react. I don't know. I have no comment on it.
people who actually help rescue?
deckhands and captains will be made available later on.
They're made later on. Obviously, people were very pleased to be saved. The ones that I talked to. I might also point out that the Red Cross was here, and the Red Cross had given everybody blankets, and they had hot coffee and chocolate and that sort of thing, and they're fine. Okay.
People that are flying in the skies right now are flying in and out of LaGuardia. This is not going to happen again.
I believe it's the case that there hasn't been a fatality in the United States in air travel in over 2 years. It is far and away per mile and maybe even per trip the safest ways that you can travel. If you want to worry, they always say this, and it is true, make sure you wear your seatbelts to and from the airport, because once you get in an airplane, history shows in the United States it is a very safe way of traveling. Nobody can guarantee that accidents won't happen, but I, for one, would not have any problems having my daughters fly this evening in an airplane. Let me get somebody else. Yes, miss.
Can you give us a chronology from when the plane goes down through when each unit and the folks arrived? Is that possible?
It'll take a while. The New York Waterways and Circle Line were first on the scene.
Yeah, and honestly, we're still working out the details, trying to interview the crews ourselves.
That's what he told me. Pilot said he walked the plane twice, all the way back. Yes, miss. There were a few that I talked to that went into the water. Most, I gather, either stepped directly from the plane onto a boat or onto the wings and then onto a boat. So most were not soaking wet. The pilot is waiting to talk to the National Transportation Safety Board.
About how quickly the plane started to fill with water. Did you talk about that?
It did not fill with water so fast that he didn't have time to walk all the way back and forward. And then Commissioner Kelly had two divers who walked the plane afterwards. By that time, there was some water slowing it. But the plane is still afloat. At least it was the last time I heard. One more question.
Rule out what the cause, at least in terms of foul play, is. How can that be done quickly when we're not?
There is never anything done quickly when they investigate a plane incident, and that's something that should give you a great deal of pleasure. They don't jump to conclusions, but based on the little we know at the moment, and there's always an assessment like this made by the police commissioner and other emergency personnel, there does not appear to be anything other than an accident or a natural issue, but not terrorism. And the reason that's the one thing we do check in advance to make sure, because you don't want it to start a chain. But it appears that it had nothing to do with this. And the speculation about birds or anything else is something that the National Transportation Safety Board will answer. We'll give you the last question.
Is the black box recovered?
The plane's still there. It's still in the plane. There won't be any problem at all. The plane is still floating as far as it was anyways 20 minutes ago, and certainly would not be any damage to the black box. So we'll give
Does the pilot talk of any intention of trying to get back to the airport?
He did not talk about what he did other than to help us ascertain that everybody got off. And that's what he's supposed to do, wait and talk, not to us, but to the National Transportation Safety Board. I hate to make it a broken record, but that's the ways that you can be assured that they find out what really happened. And I just want to finish by saying that our police department and our fire department, you couldn't ask for any group to work better. They cooperate with the Port Authority and their police department, New York Waterways, Circle Line. It's really hard to find anything that if this happened again, you would want to change. We are very lucky to have all these people who are dedicated, who work together, and who train together. And after this, you'll have to wait. We'll release when we know for sure the exact passenger numbers and where they all are. But let me reiterate, it appears that roughly 155 people, they all got out safely, no serious injuries. The pilot certainly did a masterful job of landing, and it would appear that our response, thanks to the governor and the state and the Port Authority and the city agencies, everybody worked together, and it should give us some comfort. It's terrible that it happened, but if it was going to happen, this outcome is as good as you could ever hope and pray for. And thank you. Governor?
Thank you. Let's go.
You've been listening to Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Patterson and the harbor master of the New York waterways give what they know so far of this, what Governor Patterson called the miracle on the Hudson this afternoon. Welcome back to CBS 2 live coverage of this intentional plane crash of a US Airways flight. I'm Dana Tyler.
And I'm Don Daler. And just in case you've just tuned in and gotten home from work, a quick recap. At about 3:26 p.m. this afternoon, US Airways Flight 1549 had just taken off from LaGuardia, was in the air approximately 3 minutes, but only 30 to 45 seconds after takeoff, according to a National Air Traffic Controllers Union spokesman, they struck multiple bird strikes. They tried to return to LaGuardia. They were told to go to Teterboro Airport, and then moments later, the pilot miraculously laid the plane down in the Hudson River, a controlled crash landing in the river. And according to Mayor Bloomberg, the pilot did a masterful job. Latest reports are no fatalities and only minor injuries of the 155 passengers and crew on board.
And the mayor made a point of saying also some of the passengers, the majority of them did not even go into the river.
Right.
They walked from the plane across the wing or from the plane right into the rescue boats, the many boats that were there instantly to help these passengers. Another part of this that's such good news, just the response of the city agencies, the municipal agencies, and New Jersey as well. Look at the people on the boat here. I mean, we've seen, great signs of, thank goodness, and victory, actually.
And the Circle Line and New York Waterways boats immediately rescued these people, took them to shore. Quite a few of them are now in Weehawken. Our Jay Dow, CBS 2's Jay Dow, is there now to set the scene there. Jay.
Don, Dana, let's try to set the scene for you. No one wants to see a plane go down, but as we've heard, this is as good of an outcome as you could have hoped for, and that's why we have so many emergency responders here and even passengers who were on that plane who were being wheeled out in stretchers, smiling, relieved, because no one was seriously injured, according to several emergency responders who we've spoken to, and there were no deaths in this miraculous landing on the Hudson River. I'm joined now by Jeff Wells, Weehawken Public Safety Director. Jeff, talk to me about your efforts over here on this side of the Hudson River.
Well, upon getting notification of a commercial plane down, we activated our disaster plan. And what we did is we responded immediately to the waterfront here, and we have confirmed that a plane was down with multiple people in the water and on slides and on the wings of the plane. We dispatched our fireboat, and we also commandeered, with the great assistance of New York Waterway, several ferries that were docked here in Weehawken waiting for the beginning of the evening rush hour. We placed police, fire, EMS personnel on those ferries who responded the half mile out in the river. They were there within 5 minutes of being loaded, and they assisted in pulling people out of the water, pulling them off the evacuation slides which were deployed, and there was actually people on wings. And those people some of those people, approximately 50 of those people, 60 of those people were brought back here to 2 treatment centers here in Weehawken, one at the main New York Waterway ferry here, and a second site at a marina which houses Arthur's Landing Restaurant, which was put into use as a treatment center.
I understand there was some incredible timing here. There was a New York Waterway ferry actually crossing as the plane came down?
That's correct. A waterway ferry in transit had seen the crash and responded to the site, and they were, from what I understand, the first unit on the scene, and they pulled people out of the water. They were joined shortly thereafter by additional waterway ferries with New Jersey-based first responders, and about the same time, Coast Guard, New York City Harbor Patrol, Coast Guard units. It was a great bi-state effort. Everyone was pulled out of the water. As previously reported, at least on this side, I can't speak for what New York, people that were brought to New York. No one that was brought here to Weehawken sustained any life-threatening injuries. In fact, a lot of them didn't refuse medical treatment, and we're in the process of reuniting them at one of our shelters with family members.
And they're all out of here now,
right.
On their way.
They're out of the way, and now we're trying to open up the ferry terminal because of the accident. This ferry terminal is going to serve double duty since the Midtown ferry cannot get down to the Hoboken terminal. So we're going to have to get this open so we can get the stranded people back to Jersey.
Let's look forward on a semi-related subject. For the people who live in New Jersey and rely on this ferry to get to and from work, what should they know about that for tomorrow morning's commute?
Our understanding is that this action should not affect the morning commute, and hope we will be getting the passengers. We expect to open this ferry terminal here in Weehawken within the next half hour, and get the commuters that came over by ferry, both here in Weehawken and Hoboken, back to the Jersey side.
Jeff Wells, Weehawken Public Safety Director, thank you very much. You heard it. Jeff says it was a miracle, a team effort, several agencies taking part in this rescue operation to get those passengers off the plane and onto land. We're live in Weehawken. Jay Dow, CBS 2 News. Back to you.
Thank you, Jay. And the mayor also said that he spoke to the miracle worker here, the pilot of the plane, about how he walked the length of the plane twice as the last one to get off and made sure no one was there. The plane went down near the Intrepid, which, as you know, is in the mid-40s on the west side. Right now, the mayor just telling us that it is tied down in Battery City.
Right, so they're going to be able to do the investigation. The NTSB is due on scene any time now. And let's go to Hazel Sanchez, who's on the west side now, right on shore of where all this took place. Hazel.
And let me tell you, the rescue operation out here ran like a well-oiled machine, which is amazing considering how very, very cold it is out here. We're right on the corner of West 40th Street and 12th Avenue, across the street from the ferry terminal, which became the triage center for the victims of this plane crash. From what we understand, all of the victims from that crash that were inside that center have all been taken to nearby hospitals or have been cleared. Most of the people that are there right now are emergency responders. The southbound lanes of the West Side Highway here at 40th Street remain closed and are mostly blocked here by city buses, FDNY, and police vehicles. If you can pan out a little bit, you can see that the northbound lanes of the West Side Highway are open, but are obviously very jam-packed with traffic and very slow moving at this time. So if you can avoid this area at all, please do so. But I have to say, speaking from experience and watching the people that came here earlier today, it was amazing how quickly, as soon as these people were taken off those boats here to the triage center and quickly taken to those hospitals for treatment, it was really quite a scene to see. Great job by the city. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Hazel Sanchez, live on the west side. Very cold. The wind has kicked up a bit.
You can tell by the way Hazel's talking, and actually hypothermia was one of the concerns for the passengers. But the mayor said that only, as you said, only very few passengers actually went into the water. Most of them were rescued right onto the boats themselves or were waiting on the wing of the boat. With the injured people, some 78 or so reported to hospitals, is our John Slattery at Roosevelt Hospital now. John, what's the latest there?
Well, nearly a dozen passengers have been brought here, and the officials here at the hospital at Roosevelt, which is at 10th Avenue and 59th, estimated that they would have between 12 and 15. The last count here was 11, and it appears that that may be all who comes at this time. But the great news is, according to the doctors, is there doesn't appear to be anything terribly serious about these patients. We spoke a short time ago with Dr. Gabe Wilson.
Certainly you can spend a lot more time in cold air than you can in cold water. Just moments in cold water can sort of be disabling and you can develop severe hypothermia. The heat loss is rapid. Air, you can spend more time before you succumb. What I was told by a couple of the survivors that I spoke with is that they were waist deep in water in the plane, were guided to one of the rafts where they sort of slid into, and while they sort of got water all over them, I don't think they were submerged completely.
Yeah, you can imagine how frightening it must have been for those passengers who found themselves wading through frigid water in the Hudson River. But those patients are now at this hospital or at others. And according to what we're hearing from the officials here, everybody appears to be doing quite well considering the exposure. Reporting live from Roosevelt, John Slattery, CBS 2 News.
Thank you, John. More pictures here from earlier this afternoon. The plane taking off from LaGuardia Airport just around 3:26, I believe. We've heard from passengers, and their stories just incredible, as you can imagine. Most of us, been on an airplane, sitting there, going through the routine of the safety instructions. Pay attention, don't pay attention. These people did pay attention. Let's hear from their experience today. We'll have those sound bites for you in just a few moments, but just remarkable to hear from some of them what it was like. Also, Don, the mayor mentioning that there was a baby on board.
Yes, the mayor said one infant on board, and the infant is in good condition, we're told, and most of the people, the mayor says, who were injured are all in stable condition, which is miraculous to say the least when you think about a plane hitting the water like that. Now here we see some of the survivors there. This woman here, that's one of the hallmark images from this whole day, is the woman bouncing up and down with a big grin on her face, obviously overjoyed to be alive, as I'm sure everyone on that plane is. Let's hear now from some of the passengers who survived this plane crash in the Hudson River today.
About 3 or 4 minutes into the flight, I was sitting in 22A, so the left engine just blew. Fire, flames coming out of it, and I was looking right at it because I was sitting right there. And it just started smelling a lot like gasoline. And a couple minutes after that, the pilot said, "You guys got to brace for a hard impact." And that's when everyone started, to be honest, saying prayers and looked over the water, and we thought we had a chance because, there was some water. And got to give it to the pilot, man. He made a hell of a landing. What was the landing like? Scary.
All right, so again, very, very lucky people. Now on the phone we have trauma expert Steve Crimando. Steve, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
Great. Steve, I know you didn't work on these people, but you do know the kinds of things that a person experiences, the human body experiences in this kind of obviously a rapid deceleration. What kind of injuries might these doctors be looking at?
They're probably looking at a range of different, both physical and emotional effects. Certainly any type of blunt force and just a general traumatic impact of the event. But given the happy sort of ending that it looks like there's not a lot of physical injuries, a lot of what they'll be looking at with folks really is their psychological welfare as well. Certainly people have every reason to be thrilled and feel fantastic, but it might not be for several hours and even for several days for many people before they really feel the emotional impact of this event as well.
All right, Steve. One other question here, though. The passengers emerged supposedly unscathed. Is there a risk, though, in these kinds of situations, especially with elderly passengers or maybe passengers who are ill to begin with, that they have a risk of heart attack or shock even though they've survived the initial impact?
Yes, certainly there's a whole range of physical risks as well. As you mentioned, it's delayed concept, and that's not true just of the elderly. Certainly anyone who comes off the emotional high, the adrenaline of being in a fight and flight or pure survival mode, and then again stepping out of that and trying to settle themselves down for several hours and perhaps even for several days for some people, there can be a risk, increased risk of some physical emergencies, as you mentioned, heart attack, respiratory distress, certainly exacerbations of any existing medical conditions they have. It's funny that the mind and body have a way of kind of putting us in that survival mode and, to a degree, numbing us out. And it can be several hours, as I mentioned, and even days later until the full physical effects and maybe even some of the emergency aspects you've mentioned really kick in.
And maybe even years from now with post-traumatic stress disorder.
In that condition, yeah, people can find that traumatic stress sort of markers, maybe some reminders, afraid to get on the plane, reminders when they watch television and see things that bring that back. There's a whole range, certainly, of traumatic stress markers that can come back, as you mentioned, well into the years after the event.
Steve Crimando, thank you so much for your insight on this.
We have Dr. Max Gomez. Thank you, Stephen, to follow up on that. And, you might look at a river and think, well, of course, that's not into buildings. Yes, that's not into land.
Exactly. But the last reported airspeed of the airplane was about 172 miles an hour. Water at that speed is essentially like concrete. so it's very hard. But it looks like he was able to bring it in and skip along the surface of the water, so there wasn't any of that sudden deceleration, so you would get some of these sudden impact injuries and some of the, you get some bumps and bruises. Also, the other thing that's interesting here is that even though he lost power in both engines, it looks like he must have had enough either hydraulic power or perhaps electric emergency power to use his control surfaces to be able to navigate and maneuver the airplane into, it looked like it was right down the center of the river. So he had to have enough control, enough power at least there to control the airplane to bring it down.
The fact that he didn't hit a boat, he didn't hit a wave, the river was eerily calm that time of day, which this time of year, it's hardly ever like that.
And at that hour, it's getting to be rush hour. The river is crowded with ferry boats, barges, all sorts of passenger traffic. Fortunately, not a whole lot of sort of, you know, casual traffic on a river on a day like today, but he missed everything. It's really just amazing.
Also, the stroke of luck that very few, very few were actually in the water, and those who were in the water for a very quick time before they were rescued.
Exactly, 40-degree water. You lose body heat 25 times faster in water than you do in air, and you know how cold the air was at 18 degrees. The 40-degree water, you're only going to last about 30 minutes before you lose consciousness in that kind of temperature, but fortunately it looks like nobody was in the water anywhere near that long.
All right, thank you, Dr. Max Gomez. We should also say we have heard from Doug Parker, the CEO of US Airways, who made a very brief statement in Tempe, Arizona, before coming here to the New York area to meet with the NTSB and his crew. And he spoke briefly, just saying that everyone was off the plane safely and accounted for.
Right. So to recap, 155 people on board. Our latest report is no serious injuries, certainly no fatalities. And as Governor Patterson said, and I would imagine the headlines tomorrow and all the papers are going to be, miracle on the Hudson.
We've heard some incredible stories of survival. You'll hear more of them on a CBS 2 special report of the crash in the Hudson River of the US Airways Flight 1549 from LaGuardia en route to Charlotte, North Carolina this afternoon. That's tonight at 7 o'clock.
We're going to join CBS News now. Katie Couric for the evening news is live at the scene. We will see you back here for our 7 o'clock special.